My name is Rebecca Langford. I'm 28 years old. And the afternoon, my family cut me out of my grandmother's funeral reception. I learned that in some families, the loudest grief is just the best disguise for the loudest guilt. My brother stood by the fireplace in our grandmother's living room, red-eyed and shaking, telling the whole room that I had manipulated Grandma in her final months, that I had pressured her into changing her will, that every dollar she left me was money I had stolen from a dying woman. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My father set down his coffee and said, loud enough for our aunts and cousins to hear, "We raised you better than this. Get your coat. You are not welcome here." I stood in the middle of that room, holding a paper plate of food I had brought myself, and I watched 40 relatives decide my character in under a minute. My cousin Margaret actually turned her back on me. My uncle muttered something about disgrace. My brother kept crying into his sleeve like a man auditioning for a role he had already won. I did not scream. I did not defend myself. I set the plate down on the side table, picked up my bag, and walked out into the gray October wind. My car was parked 3 houses down. I sat behind the wheel for a long time before I could remember how to drive. 6 days later, I was sitting at the small desk in my apartment, going through a folder of my grandmother's old financial paperwork that her attorney had sent me, when I noticed something that made my hands go still. I pulled up my laptop. I opened a database I had access to through my job. I ran one query. The screen loaded. I read the result 3 times. Within 90 minutes of what I found, I sent a single email to one person. Within 20 minutes of that email, my phone lit up like a fire alarm. My brother. Please don't do anything yet. We can talk. My mother. I think we need to sit down as a family. My father. Call me immediately. I looked at the 3 messages stacked on top of each other. I thought about the paper plate, the turned backs, the word disgrace. I typed back 3 words. Not your call. But before I show you what I found in that query, and why it turned my family from righteous mourners into panicked strangers in a single afternoon, let me ask you this. If your own family stood in a room and condemned you without asking one question, would you ever sit at their table again? The truth is, the afternoon at the reception was not the beginning of anything. It was the moment my brother's plan ran out of cover. I had moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment in Raleigh, almost 3 years earlier, on the 2nd floor of a brick building, with a balcony just wide enough for one folding chair and a dying basil plant. I worked as a forensic accountant for a regional firm that mostly handled fraud investigations for small banks and credit unions. Most days my job meant staring at spreadsheets for hours, tracing money through shell accounts, learning to recognize the patterns people use when they want to move funds without leaving footprints. I used to think that training made me careful. After what happened with my family, I realized it had also made me unusually hard to lie to. My older brother, Jason Langford, was the opposite of careful. He had been the family's bright spot since we were kids. Star quarterback in high school, fraternity president in college, charming at every dinner, always the first to toast my father at birthdays. He worked in commercial real estate in Charlotte and drove a car that cost more than my annual rent. His wife, Kelsey, ran a boutique that sold candles and linen aprons to women who had never done a load of laundry themselves. To the rest of the family, Jason was the proof that the Langfords were doing fine. To me, he was the reason I had learned, by the age of 14, to keep my accomplishments small and my needs smaller. 2 days after the funeral reception, my best friend Tasha Morgan showed up at my apartment with a grocery bag full of wine and enough fury on my behalf to level a building. Tasha was a paralegal at a downtown law firm. Wore blazers in the summer because she liked the silhouette. and had once reduced a senior partner to silence by quoting his own deposition back to him word for word. She sat on my couch with her shoes off and listened to me lay out the whole scene, the crying brother, the turned backs, the coffee set down like a gavel. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Beck, that story is too polished. Jason didn't walk into that reception and improvise that speech. He walked in with it already memorized." I wanted to argue with her because I was tired enough to wonder if I had missed something. Maybe I was around Grandma more than everyone else. I said, "Maybe it did look suspicious from the outside." Tasha set her glass down hard. "Rebecca, that is exactly what men like your brother count on. They build the accusation first. Then they let you doubt yourself into silence. Then," she said the sentence that stopped me. "So, stop thinking about what your family is saying now. Start thinking about what Jason was doing 6 months ago." The next morning, while I was going through a case file at my desk, Tasha texted me, "Aunt Patricia will talk if you ask the right way. Don't waste the opening." Aunt Patricia was my grandmother's younger sister, 73 years old. Sharp as a tack, and disliked by half the family because she never pretended to forget anything. We met that evening at a diner off Hillsborough Street. The kind with vinyl booths and pie under a glass dome. She slid into the seat across from me, wearing a navy cardigan and a look of pure impatience. "Whatever this is," she said, "let's not dance around it." I asked her what she remembered about the last year of Grandma's life. She stirred her coffee once. At first, she gave me careful answers. "Your grandmother was tired. Jason visited often. Kelsey brought flowers." Then I asked the question Tasha had told me to ask. "Aunt Patricia, did Grandma ever say anything to you about money being moved around?" She went very still. Then she looked at me over her glasses and said, "She called me in July. She said one of the accounts looked wrong. She said Jason had offered to help her simplify the paperwork. And she had let him. And now she wasn't sure what she had signed." My chest tightened. "Did she do anything about it?" Patricia shook her head. "She said she was going to ask her attorney to review everything in September. She died in August." I sat there holding a fork I didn't remember picking up. Patricia leaned forward. "Rebecca, your grandmother loved you. But she was ashamed. She thought she had let Jason talk her into something. And she didn't want to admit it to the family until she understood what. That's why she didn't call you. She was going to fix it first. Then, tell you, before she left." Patricia gave me one more thing. She slid a folded business card across the table. "A name. A phone number. Douglas Haynes. Your grandmother's longtime financial advisor, before Jason convinced her to move things around. If anyone knows what got restructured." "He does." I drove home in silence. When I got to my apartment, I sat on my balcony in the cold and seriously thought about letting the whole thing drop. I had my grandmother's small inheritance. I had my own job. I had an apartment nobody could throw me out of. My brother had already poisoned the family against me. And fighting it felt like shouting into a stadium that had already picked its team. I almost called Tasha to tell her I was done. Then I opened my laptop to close it and noticed the folder her attorney had sent me. The one with Grandma's older financial records. I opened it out of something like obligation. 20 minutes later, I saw the first thing that didn't match. A transfer from one of Grandma's savings accounts to a brokerage account I had never heard of. Dated the previous February. For $42,000. I pulled up a second statement. There it was again. A month later, another transfer. Smaller this time. Then another. I stopped looking because my hands had started shaking and I did not want to make decisions with shaking hands. The next morning I called Douglas Haynes. He was a soft-spoken man in his 60s, with an office above a dry cleaner and a wall of framed CPA certifications. He offered me coffee in a paper cup. He sat behind his desk and folded his hands and said, "Miss Langford, I have been waiting almost a year for somebody in your family to ask me about this." Then he told me what I already half suspected. My grandmother had fired him in March of the previous year. The termination letter had arrived in his office by mail. On her stationery, with her signature. He had not questioned it at the time, because the signature looked right. And because Jason had been listed as her new point of contact, but something about the letter had bothered him enough that he had kept a copy in a locked drawer. "Do you want to see it?" he asked. I nodded. He pulled it out. I studied it. The signature was close, but the R in her first name curved the wrong way. My grandmother's R always leaned forward, like it was about to fall. This one leaned back. I said, "That is not her handwriting." Douglas said, "I thought so too, but I had no standing to challenge it." "You do." He gave me copies of every statement he still had from before the termination. He told me the account structure he had built for her over 20 years, and what it should have still looked like at the time of her death. My chest went cold again. The kind of cold that means your body knows something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I spent the rest of that day at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, mapping out the difference between what her accounts should have contained and what they actually contained at the end. The gap was almost $200,000. I drove to Tasha's apartment that night and showed her my notes. She read them twice. Then she said, "Rebecca, this is not a family dispute anymore. This is a crime." "I know," I said. "But knowing and proving are different. If I walk into my parents' living room tomorrow with a legal pad, Jason will cry again. And everyone will call me cruel for bringing it up. So we find something he cannot cry over." Tasha said, "We find something on paper, with a date, and a bank logo, and his name next to it." That is when I remembered where I worked. My firm had authorized access, with proper case documentation, to a financial records database that cross-referenced account activity for fraud investigations. I could not use it for personal matters, but I could, with the permission of my supervisor and a signed engagement letter from Grandma's estate attorney, run a legitimate inquiry if there was reasonable suspicion of financial abuse of an elderly person. That was a real legal category. My grandmother's attorney, a patient woman named Elena Rivera, agreed to sign the engagement letter within a day of my explaining what I had found. I walked my supervisor through the suspicion without naming my brother. She approved the query. 3 days after the reception where my family cut me out, he said me this could work, entered the parameters, and waited for the database to return results. When it did, my stomach dropped. The brokerage account Grandma's money had been transferred to was registered at an address in Charlotte, a condo Jason and Kelsey had bought the previous year. The authorized user on the account was my brother. I stared at the screen. Then I printed the report, signed the audit trail, and walked it to my supervisor's office. She read it once, looked up at me, and said, "Rebecca, you need to bring this to the attorney today." I did. Elena read through every page. She asked me quiet, careful questions. She asked if there were witnesses to my grandmother's state of mind in the months before the transfers. I told her about Aunt Patricia. She asked about the termination letter. I told her about Douglas Haynes and the R that leaned the wrong way. She set down her pen and said, "Rebecca, this is not just an inheritance problem. This is possibly forgery. possibly elder financial exploitation, and almost certainly grounds to reopen the estate. I want to send a preservation letter to every financial institution involved before your brother realizes what you have. May I send it today? I said yes. Then I went home and sat on my balcony in the cold and waited to feel something. What I felt was tired. Not victorious. Not angry. Just tired in the way you get when you finally stop carrying something you did not know was heavy. Elena sent the preservation letter that afternoon. It was a boring, professional document. It instructed the banks and brokerage to preserve all records related to specific account numbers, pending a potential legal review. And it identified Jason Langford as a party of interest. A copy, as a matter of standard practice, went to Jason himself. That was the email that set off the fire. Within 20 minutes of the letter going out, my phone started lighting up. Jason first. Please don't do anything yet. We can talk. Then my mother. I think we need to sit down as a family. Then my father. Call me immediately. I looked at the 3 messages and typed back 3 words. Not your call. Then I turned the phone face down on the coffee table and poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly. And for the first time in a week, my hands did not shake. Jason showed up at my apartment that same night. He banged on the door. I opened it with the chain still on. He was not crying this time. His eyes were dry and hard and scanning me, like he was trying to figure out which version of me was standing in the hallway. Let me in, he said. I said. Through the chain is fine, he said. This is about our family. I said. No, Jason. This is about the $200,000. His face did something I had never seen it do before. It went flat. All the charm. All the quarterback warmth. Just emptied out of it. You don't understand, he said. I have obligations. I had to move things around. Grandma wanted to help me. She was confused toward the end. She agreed to everything. I said. Funny. Douglas Haynes still has her termination letter. The signature is not hers. Jason stared at me. His jaw worked. You went to Douglas. I went everywhere. I said. He tried a new face. To the one he used to use when we were kids, and he wanted me to cover for him. Rebecca, he said. Softer now. Whatever you found. We can keep this inside the family. Mom and Dad don't need to know the details. Kelsey doesn't need to know. We can work out a payback plan. Just don't let the lawyers get any further than they already have. I looked at my brother through 4 inches of chain door, and I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. He was not asking because he was sorry. He was asking because he had calculated that begging me was cheaper than facing the banks. I said. Jason. You stood in Grandma's living room and told 40 people I pressured a dying woman. You let our parents throw me out of her funeral. You let Aunt Margaret turn her back on me. And now you want me to handle this inside the family, he said. You're still my sister. I said. You should have remembered that in October. Then I closed the door. My mother called me the next morning. I let it go to voicemail and listened to it later. Rebecca, she said. Please. Whatever is going on, we can work through it. I know we reacted badly at the reception. Jason was upset. We were all upset. Please don't let one bad afternoon become something we cannot undo. That word. We. It landed the way it always did. Like a blanket thrown over a fire. I called her back that evening. I told her. Flatly. That Jason had forged Grandma's signature to terminate her financial advisor, moved nearly $200,000 of her money into a brokerage account tied to his condo, and then used me as cover the minute he needed someone to blame. I told her that an attorney and my firm's supervisor already had the documentation. I told her that the preservation letters were already out. There was a long silence on the line. Then my mother said, "Are you sure?" I said. "Mom, I am a forensic accountant. Being sure is literally what I do for a living." She started to cry. She said, "But the family, Rebecca. What will people say?" And there it was. The same sentence that had ended every difficult conversation in our house for as long as I could remember. Not grief. Not shock. Not, "I am sorry we believed him," without asking. Just, "What will people say?" I said, "Mom, that is not my problem anymore." And I hung up. My father tried next. He drove 2 hours from their house to Raleigh and showed up at my building without warning. He stood in the lobby in his old gray coat, looking smaller than he had at the reception. I came down because the doorman called me. "Not because I wanted to," he said. "Rebecca, please, can we get coffee?" I said. "We can stand in this lobby for 10 minutes. He said. "I didn't know." I said, "That is the whole problem. You didn't know because you didn't ask." He flinched. He said, "Your brother has always been." He stopped. I waited. He tried again. "Your brother has always been the one we worried about. He has debts. Kelsey has expectations. We thought the pressure was getting to him." I said, "And I have always been the one you stopped worrying about. So when he needed a scapegoat, I was the easiest shape." My father did not deny it. He looked at the marble floor for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "Tell the truth in front of the same relatives you let condemn me. Publicly. On the record." He said, "That will destroy your brother." I said, "No. Dad. Jason already destroyed Jason. You are just deciding whether you are going to let him take me down with him." My father left without agreeing to anything. That told me everything I needed to know. The next 2 weeks were the slowest and longest of my life. Elena and my firm's legal counsel coordinated with the bank. Statements were subpoenaed. The forged termination letter was authenticated by a handwriting examiner. Jason's attorney reached out to Elena with a settlement offer that was, "In a sense, please do not press criminal charges, and we will return the money." Elena forwarded it to me with a one-line note. "Your call." I thought about it for exactly one night. Then I wrote back, "Return the full amount. With interest. To the estate within 30 days. Acknowledge the forgery in writing. No criminal charges from me. But if any of my relatives ever repeats the story that I manipulated Grandma, the written acknowledgement becomes public." Jason signed within a week. The money came back to the estate. The assets were redistributed, according to my grandmother's original will. Which, as it turned out, it had left the largest share to a children's literacy foundation she had quietly supported for decades. My share was modest. Jason's share, on paper, was what it always had been. In reality, of course, he had already spent most of his. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Because once paper exists, other people start asking their own questions. Kelsey filed for divorce within 2 months. Jason lost his real estate license. Not because of my case, but because his firm ran a routine background check after the news of the estate dispute leaked through 2 aunts who could not keep quiet at Thanksgiving. A cousin I had not spoken to in years messaged me to apologize for turning away at the reception. She wrote, "I didn't know. I only knew what Jason said. I am sorry I didn't ask. I wrote back, "Thank you. I mean it. But next time, ask first." My mother left 3 voicemails over the following weeks, each one softer than the last. My father did not call. What he did, finally, was something I had not expected. He sent an email to the same extended family that had been at the reception. He wrote, plainly, that Jason had admitted to forging documents and redirecting funds from my grandmother's accounts, that I had done nothing wrong, that the family had treated me unjustly, and that he was sorry. He copied me on it. He did not ask me to respond. That, I thought, was as close to honesty as he had ever gotten with me. It was also far too late to matter the way he hoped it would. Aunt Patricia invited me to her house the week before Christmas. We sat in her kitchen and drank tea. And she told me that my grandmother had, in her last lucid conversation, told Patricia that she was proud of me. Patricia had been holding on to that sentence for almost a year, waiting for the right moment. I cried at her kitchen table in a way I had not let myself cry at the reception or in my car afterward or in any of the lawyer meetings that followed. Patricia did not try to fix it. She just poured me more tea and said, "Your grandmother knew what kind of man your brother was. She hoped he would grow out of it. He didn't. You were not imagining the way they treated you all those years. Rebecca, you were just the only one honest enough to notice." I drove home that evening feeling Baxwell. For the first time. Like the story had a shape. Not a happy shape. Just a clear one. My mother asked. That January, if I would come home for my father's birthday in February. I told her no. I told her I was not punishing them. But I was also not going to pretend that 1 email and 3 voicemails had undone a lifetime of being the easy one to blame. She said, "Will you ever come home?" I said, "I will come back when I can walk through that door without bracing. I don't know when that will be. I am not going to lie about it." She accepted that. Or at least she stopped pushing. I spent that birthday with Tasha, eating takeout on my balcony with a blanket wrapped around both of us. Watching the sky get dark over the rooftops, Tasha raised her plastic cup and said, "To people who read the footnotes." I laughed for the first time in months. Revenge, I had always thought, was supposed to feel like fire. Mine didn't. Mine looked like a signed engagement letter, a database query, a certified letter from an attorney, and a family-wide email my father did not want to write. Mine looked like refusing to be the person whose life was easiest to sacrifice, just because I had been trained to stay quiet. Mine looked like 3 words typed into a phone, while 3 members of my family begged me to protect them from the consequences of what they had already chosen. Not your call. And here's the question that still sits with me on the nights, when the apartment is quiet and the city is breathing outside my window. When the people who raised you only start asking the right questions after the proof has already arrived. Is that family? Or is it just self-preservation wearing a softer face? I know what my answer is now. I do not say it out loud very often. Because I do not need to. I just live it. I sleep through the night. I keep my own records. I take my own calls. And when anyone asks me, at work or at a dinner party or in the grocery store, whether I have siblings, sigh. I had a brother. That is all I say. That is all the story I owe anyone anymore.